Carries.
I'm here.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Good.
Present.
Member Hughes.
Here.
Member Armstrong. Absent. Member Knight.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. As usual, Phil, would you lead us in the pledge?
I'll be happy to. Please join me in pledging allegiance to the flag of our great republic. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Title VI Policy and Meetings Procedure. CYMPO complies with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and related non-discrimination statutes and regulations in all programs and activities. Members of the public may review the CYMPO Title VI plan and submit a self-identification survey by accessing the CYMPO website. A reminder to those in attendance of the meeting, please keep your line on mute until you wish to speak. This meeting is available for public viewing on the CYMPO YouTube page. With that being said, we do the call to public for item 4. This is to provide an opportunity for presentation of comments by the public on subjects not on the agenda. Individuals wishing to address the board need not request permission in advance and are limited to 3 minutes. Mr. Gallegos, do we have anyone that appears that would like to be speaking?
Mr. Chair, nobody at this time, but a reminder to our attendees, if you would like to speak, there is a virtual way to. On the bottom of your screen, there's a raise your hand function. If you do that, we'll be able to see it, and then we'll be able to unmute you, and the chair will allow you the 3 minutes to speak on future items on the agenda. At this time, Mr. Chair, no one's requested to speak.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. We'll move on to item 5, consideration and possible action to approve the May 19th, 2021 Executive Board regular meeting minutes. We've all had a chance to review these. If there's any questions or comments about it, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Can I have a second? I'll second it.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right. Moving on to item 6, CYMPO Administrative Report. I'll turn it over to Mr. Gallegos.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, just a couple quick items. The 89, this SR 89 to 89A on-ramps study is moving forward. The TAC and the staff have reviewed the quotes and have selected AECOM. Just a little bit of background on the process. We have a real streamlined process because the executive board about a year ago approved an on-call list. That particular on-call list was able to go through all the hoops so that we can have a much more streamlined process. All that to say that all the requirements have been met previously on the on-call list. And at this point, after the meeting, staff will be reaching out to Chair Pelguda to get his signature because it is over $50,000 to do the study at 75, and he'll be signing the task order, and we'll send out the notice to proceed. So that project is moving forward, and we'll begin that process here in the next couple of days. At this point, there's no business for the month of July for the executive board or the TAC. You can keep the calendar invite on your calendars just in case, but I'm planning on directing Allison to send a cancellation here in the next few weeks if nothing changes. So no business for the executive board and TAC in July. August the 11th is our retreat. On Wednesday, August the 11th, from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. We are scheduling that to be an in-person retreat. We will offer hybrid options if that is needed for anyone. At this point, no one's expressed that. I believe even Gary checked his calendar and was able to travel from Yuma to join us, but we'll keep that open in case we do need to offer any virtual engagement, but it will be in person August the 11th from 12 to 3 p.m. And then the August 18th meeting, for that executive board meeting, again, we were planning on offering that as an in-person meeting again to resume those, but to be mindful that, again, there's still people like Gary and others that may have conflicting calendars or travel or different things. So we will use a hybrid option. Those are all the updates I have at this time. Happy to answer any questions or comments.
Vinny, I have a
Questions or comments?
question. Have you determined the location for the retreat yet?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Member Good. Right now, we are reviewing the downtown Prescott at the Hilton. I have a meeting there tomorrow to review their conference space. So right now, they're the lead space at this point. We probably should know in the next week or two. Allison's narrowed it down for me to a few options, but from everything I've seen so far, that's the leading space at this point.
Yeah, we've had a couple of meetings there, and they're pretty well managed, and we're pretty happy with them.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Hopefully it'll all work out then for us.
Anything else? All right, we're moving on to item 7, RTAC update from Kevin Adam, who looks like he just came out of an episode of The Hangover. And
I do
take
have
it
a
away,
question.
Kevin.
Do I need to get I'm gonna get a baseball hat on.
Bill, I got a question. So going back to Vinny's report.
Yeah.
I didn't hit the mute button quick enough. Anyway, Vinny, where are we at on the money for 69?
Mr. Chair and Supervisor Brown, that'll be the item right after Kevin. I have a complete update, and I'll explain the funding for it.
Okay,
If that's okay.
fine. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, Kevin, I appreciate that. Your hair was distracting me.
There you go. So I'm representing, and I've taken away the hair distraction. So kill two birds with one stone. So I appreciate it, everyone. It's a incredibly busy and fluid time in the transportation world, both at the state capitol as well as in Washington. So I'll start with the state first. So we are at an impasse with the state budget. Bit of a distraction this week. A special session has been called for to address the forest fires in Pinal and Gila County. But prior to that, leadership and the governor came to an agreement on a budget proposal, dropped the bills, thinking that they had a shot at enactment, and they fell some votes short of that. Since then, the House decided to force a vote. It came up one vote short. The big area of contention continues to be the magnitude of the revenue cuts that would result from the flat individual income tax proposal. And in addition, the impact that that would have on revenue sharing, particularly for the municipalities who currently receive 15% of that funding. So there have been efforts over the last week and a half to reach a compromise somewhere in between. But at this point, they are still short of the 31 and 16 votes that they need for enactment. You know, we've at the federal level, it's not that infrequent that there's the threat or an actual government shutdown. That rarely ever happens at the state level. And state fiscal year starts on July 1st. And so that's what we are facing if there isn't an agreement prior to then. I think that there will be enough pressure to make it happen prior to that date. You know, you've got a couple of holdouts who are wanting some things adjusted, but at the same time, I think the ramifications of bucking leadership on top of having the finger pointed at you for causing a shutdown will probably be too great. And so I fully expect that we will have a state budget in place prior to July 1. But it could come up right to the right to the last minute. So obviously we'll keep you posted on that. As far as transportation is concerned, we knew very early that efforts to permanently increase the revenue streams that feed into HERF were not going to go far this year, and they haven't. However, there's been a tremendous amount of support among legislators to direct much of the one-time revenue surplus funding that's available. At the beginning of session, leadership had set aside 200 million for that purpose. We saw 31 bills introduced that would have basically funded about 400 million worth of projects across the state. The budget proposal didn't quite go that high, but they went far above that 200 million. 338 million was what was originally proposed. Now, part of the opposition to the budget as drafted was the level of spending. And unfortunately, that did include transportation. And 19 million was reduced from what would have gone to ADOT for pavement rehabilitation. So as the budget bills are drafted right now, there's 319 million that in one-time funding that will be directed to infrastructure across the state. And it's probably a good place to stop if there's any questions at the state level before I go over to federal.
There's any questions?
Okay, and at the federal level, transportation infrastructure is at the top of the agenda back in Washington. There are two movements underway, and it's very important as you follow the media coverage because it's not real clear, and I think sometimes flat out inaccurate as far as how it's being reported. But again, two efforts underway. The first one is the reauthorization of all the federal surface transportation programs that are ongoing. And those are the programs that continually provide the revenue that feeds into the state, regional, and local road systems. That effort is actually going according to schedule and looking relatively good. The second area under consideration is this one-time infrastructure package. Now that's getting all of the attention because obviously the administration put out a proposal and there's a lot of negotiations at the highest levels in Washington regarding that infrastructure package. And there's been a lot of press coverage about that process going through some setbacks, but it's important to distinguish the two because that's not the case with the authorization. In all likelihood, the authorization is going to be more impactful. So I'll start there. We've already had the primary oversight committees in the House and Senate mark up or draft their portions of the bill that they have jurisdiction over. So for highways, we're talking about in the Senate version, a 34% increase over existing levels, and the House closer to 50%. So we're looking at some fairly significant increases. The Senate was also a lot more focused on highways. It wasn't as transformative as far as getting into more of the multimodal and the climate change and some of the newer proposals that are in the administration's infrastructure plan. So the other thing that's significant about the Senate side is when it got out of the committee, it was on a unanimous vote. So it's bipartisan. All 20 members of the committee voted for it. The House, when the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, when they voted out their draft language, that was very partisan. And so still a lot of disagreements concerning the House version. So as it stands right now, the second Senate committee, the Senate Commerce Committee, actually, I haven't seen the outcome yet, but today they were taking up their drafting of the titles of the bill that they have jurisdiction over that's likely to add another 75 billion to the 304 billion that came out of environment and public works. But basically, the House right now, they are planning on voting out the bill before the 4th of July recess. And the Senate plans on voting out theirs by the end of July, which puts us on a time table of the two chambers being able to reconcile and come up with one version of the bill and having it passed prior to October 1st. So if you look at the House version, the Senate version, and what the president's budget proposal is for next year, sort of the lowest common denominator is the Senate version, which again is a 34% increase for highways. For Arizona, that would amount to about a 240 million increase in federal funding a year. And so if that's the low end of the discussions, I think there's a lot of potential there. Just real quickly on the broader infrastructure package, this is designed to be more one-time in nature. It would be on top of the authorized levels of funding. And the negotiations continue. The White House did break off discussions with a group of Senate Republicans. However, there's another group of bipartisan group of 20 senators that are now meeting and putting together a proposal which they think will be in about the $1 trillion range. There's also a group of moderate House members, which is split 29 Republicans, 29 Democrats, which is also coming up with a very similar, or actually they actually already have come up with a proposal very similar to what that bipartisan group of senators is working on. So, this would be gravy on top of the authorized program levels. There's still a really good chance that it could pass, that we could see additional funding above authorization. But even if we're just limited to authorization, it does look, particularly for highways and roads, like they are talking about a pretty substantial increase at this point. But again, real fluid, and I'll obviously keep everybody posted as events, as things develop.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Any questions?
I have a question, Kevin. Do you expect that those federal funds would be sent directly, or would they be funneled through state administration to then be distributed to cities?
It's a good question. I think it remains to be seen. What has come out of the Senate would be 90% formula funding, so it would go through the existing formulas and distributions to the states and regions, although at considerably higher levels. And so that would potentially give CYMPO more HSIP and SDBG funding to work with. The House is looking at some very significant increases, but it looks like there's going to be a lot of restrictions on the use of new funding for expansion projects. There's a very heavy emphasis on state of good repair and maintenance that's in the House language right now. The House has also, after about 15 years of being free of earmarks, the House has reintroduced that in their language. So there's about, I believe it's 5.7 billion in earmarks, including 92 million that would be directed to projects in Arizona. So there's we still haven't come to an agreement on exactly how this funding, sort of the programs they'll be directed to, and how that will eventually funnel down to the state and region, and locals for that matter.
All right.
So
In other
Kevin,
words, stay
does
tuned. Yeah.
this funding is over and above the normal grants like the infra grant, the RAISE grant, and any of the other transportation grants? That's in addition to those?
So everything that I was just discussing deals with the reauthorization. So you're looking at all of the existing formula funding plus the RAISE and infra grants and seeing higher levels of that. So no, that would be continual. This would be separate from that infrastructure package that the White House has been negotiating with various congressional leaders on. And that's the funding that would be on top in addition to the authorized level. So even if that doesn't, if they're not successful coming to an agreement on that, I think just with the existing programs, right now, it looks like there'll be some significant increases.
Well, Kevin, on that same track, even if they did follow the normal track they have in the past, by the time it would reach our level or any time where we're making proposals to probably the state holding the federal money, it's going to be at least 6 months from now.
It would have to be in effect by October 1st. Now, of course, if they're not able to get it done by October 1st, you could see another relatively short-term extension. But yes, you're looking at October, and of course there have to be time for any revisions to the existing programs to be fully implemented. But yes, you're right. On the authorization front, you're looking at least 6 months, 6 months to a year from this actually being implemented.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
We'll just move on to item 8, review, discussion, and possible action to approve the intergovernmental agreement for additional funding for State Route 69 safety and capacity improvements project and subsequent amendment to the fiscal year 2024 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. Mr. Gallegos.
Mr. Chair, members of the board. So let me offer a couple of details to it to be able to get you to where we need on the action, the request for action today. So again, brief background, this is the project between Prescott Lakes Parkway and Yavapai Road in Prescott, which is basically a widening. The entire scope of the project does extend to Heather Heights. And the reason for that is there is a median that would then run the length of the widening project in addition to the part that reaches Heather Heights. This project has been in work since 2013. It has been a regional priority project. Member Knight has talked many times about the state of the Transportation Board and funding. This is one of the few projects that exist in Greater Arizona outside Phoenix and Tucson that is not a preservation project. So something that was campaigned for many years and was achieved. This project sits right around a $13 million project again, as a widening and a safety project with the median in it. As it stands prior to this amendment that I'll be transitioning to in a moment, CYMPO has contributed to this project $800,000. Yavapai County and the Flood Control Department combined have contributed $300,000, and the city of Prescott to date has contributed $300,000. Those contributions have helped to present to the State Transportation Board, if you will, to campaign for this project, and ultimately was awarded. And ADOT by far is paying the lion's share, right around $12 million towards construction of this particular project. In order for this project to move forward, couple things early on were agreed to years ago. One of them is that CYMPO would be responsible for the design of the project. We are currently in the design phase. There are cost overruns to the design. I've invited, Alvin has left ADOT, and in replacement for Alvin for the interim, there is 2 assistant district engineers, Andy Roth, who's also in the audience, and Todd Steinberger. But I've asked Todd to help me with this particular item. to be able to talk just briefly about the reason for the cost overruns, and then I'll transition into how we're gonna, how I'm proposing that we pay for it. Todd, can you explain briefly kind of where some of the cost overruns are coming from?
Yeah, sure, Vinny. You know, what kind of generated all of this is the start and stop of the project, and then, you know, we dealt with COVID, and, you know, some changes in the scope. We added safety funding, safety improvements to the project. And so that's where we are with the $350,000. It's design related, utility coordination, clearance funding needed, and design related to the right-of-way for the right-of-way clearance. You know, we're looking at approximately $180,000 for the utility funding, and then we're looking at a total of $148,500 for the right of way. You know, I can break it down even further. We're going to need $6,000 for the right of way coordinator, and that also includes the paperwork to wrap up the right of way coordination, and we're looking at $97,500 for the right-of-way appraisals to finish that up. And then on the utility side, we are looking at $50,000 for additional staff time to wrap up the project and to get the utility clearance. We're looking at $60,000 for utility potholing, and then we're looking at $70,000 to deal with any of the utility conflicts as needed to get the right-of-way clearance. You know, and that $70,000 could potentially not need to be used depending on, you know, what we find during the potholing of the project.
Thank you, Todd. If Allison or Daniel, can you pull up the tip amendment? So that's a little bit of the background and where we're at. And then I want to explain kind of where we are and trying to move forward. As ADOT has indicated, there's $350,000 additional dollars for the project needed. If, as CYMPO is responsible for the design, it would have really wiped out our planning projects and efforts for fiscal year 22. So I went ahead and reached out to Yavapai County and the city of Prescott, and I appreciate Supervisor Brown and Councilman Good and staff helping to move this conversation along. So the proposal that I made, and as I know it's been tentatively given a thumbs up, again, I know it still has to go to the city council and the board of supervisors for approval, but is that we would go ahead and share in these cost overruns. So as it stands, if you would look at where I've listed number one, CYMPO would contribute 1/3, if you will, $117,000 towards this cost overrun. City of Prescott, $116,500, and then Yavapai County, the same as the city of Prescott. What you're looking on the screen here is the way that CYMPO, in its transparency of the funds, what we need to do to move funds around in order to achieve that $117,000 cost overrun. So I'll try not to get too confusing and too in the weeds, but basically where we have it listed as number two is we're swapping $19,000 from our admin with SPR funds. The reason for that is we need to exchange funds that are eligible for different purposes. We would not be able to use certain funds on this cost overrun. So Allison and I basically are exchanging different types of money so that we can use it. So number 2, 3, and 4 basically help us achieve the $117,000 that is needed. I would highlight number 3 is an item we'll be talking about at the retreat. So you can see that in fiscal year 22, we were scheduled to do an update on the Great Western Corridor. And in light of this cost overrun, we now need to reduce that project by $78,000, which is pretty significant. But we have a few ideas to address that, and I'll bring that up at the retreat. So again, number 2, 3, and 4 equal 117,000, if you will. And then number 5 is some bookkeeping. We have transportation planning funds that we need to identify, and that's essentially what we're doing in number 5. We're adding 72,000 to what is now called consolidated planning grant funds. So this amendment that you have outlined that is part of your action item is the way that we're moving the money around to get 117,000. You also have, and you could take this off the screen now, we also have in your packet an amended IGA between the City of Prescott, Yavapai County, CYMPO, and ADOT. And the reason for that is, again, it's illustrating the new contributions to this project. So I know I gave a lot of information, but I'm happy to take questions or comments. But essentially this 350,000 will keep this $13 million project moving forward. And again, I thank Prescott and Yavapai County for sharing in this.
Do you have anything to add to Vinny?
Well,
Anything else,
Chairman,
Vinny?
I will add that the City Council has reviewed that expenditure in their budget. We're just one meeting away from approving that final budget, and I think you can be quite confident that those amounts will be approved for contribution to this project.
All right.
Mr. Chair, if I may as well, this is Dan Cherry with the county.
Yes, sir.
We are planning on taking the county approval to the Board of Supervisors and the Flood Control District Board of Directors. The Board of Supervisors sits as the Board of Directors for approval on July 7th. I believe that we'll have full approval at that time. So.
Okay. Mr. Gallegos, anything else?
I don't have anything else. John Hughes, you got your virtual hand up. I don't know if you have a question or you wanted to make the motion. I'm sorry.
I'll make the motion to approve the intergovernmental agreement for additional funding for the State Route 69 Safety and Capacity Improvement Project.
Can I get a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Shall pass. Moving on, item 9, review and discussion of the park and ride system. Back to you, Mr. Gallegos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Councilman Good or Member Good of the CYMPO board has brought forward on behalf of the City of Prescott an item for discussion that I'd like to start the discussion today and take it into the retreat if we have a consensus support. And in just a moment, I'll turn it over to Councilman Good. But essentially at this time in the development plans for around the airport, there is some property identified for other uses, and Councilman Good has helped to bring some information forward that has the potential of a park and ride system, and has approached me, met with me and staff to see how CYMPO might do this. And again, if there's a general support, at least initial support, I can bring forward some ideas to the retreat as to how we might support that request. With that said, though, I'd like to call on Councilman Good to share additional information about this.
Well, this potential project was put together in the anticipation that there might be some federal funding for a project that would be supported by CYMPO that would be beneficial to virtually all the members of CYMPO as well. So we did contact the property owner and developer. They were amenable to offering some land there for a park and ride development. However, after meeting with Vinny, it was pretty clear that in order to move that forward, the city would have to agree to have an intent to support a broader public transportation system within the city. So our initial thought was maybe just a incremental individual route that could go from Park and Ride into the city to many of the employment areas that many of the commuters from outside of the city frequently drive their own vehicles to. But at this point, the city and the city manager are not interested in advocating for a broader intent for expansion of a full public transportation system within the city. So I think at this point, I would have to withdraw my proposal, and we'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Councilman Good. And again, this is an opportunity. I know you're withdrawing it, and we can, staff will continue to look at options if that land is available. Maybe as Councilman Good alluded to, a possible idea, as you look at the Tri-City or Quad City area, to have that area identified, if you will, as a transit meeting spot. We know that with Prescott Valley Transit, and this is somewhat, again, a little bit on the next item, but as Prescott Valley moves forward with public transit, we know that Yavapai Regional Transit continues to operate in the region. That airport area could be a real ideal location for a future meeting space, if you will, that meeting location and infrastructure. So with all that said, I know my interest is piqued. So from a staff standpoint, we'll continue to see if there's opportunities to review this idea. As Councilman Good said, I did strongly express that, if Prescott were to get moving with transit, again, it would really increase the conversation, because again, this is a good meeting location near the airport for possibly these 3 different transit systems to meet. So we'll remain hopeful. We'll keep looking at it. And if there's any other questions or ideas, we can circle back on this. But I appreciate your help, Councilman Good.
Yeah, and we will be watching Cal and Prescott Valley's micro transportation project and see how that develops and progresses, and monitor those costs that eventually, after the initial startup and funding and staffing and vehicles, how well that produces the expected mobility and versus the cost that will long-term be needed to continue that service.
Awesome. With that being said, move on to item 10, Regional Mobility Management Transit Update. Mr. Gallegos, it's all yours.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I was invited yesterday to the town of Prescott Valley to look at one of those micro transit vehicles. So I appreciate Norm Davis and Pedro Rodriguez, the transit manager, for the invitation. Was pretty warm out in the parking lot, but it was nice to step in a cool vehicle. And again, as Councilman Good just alluded to, a micro system. Definitely the public is aware of public transit. There's some real pushback to what maybe they have seen in bigger areas, Phoenix, Tucson, and other places. Town of Prescott Valley, CYMPO recognizes that's not us. So really appreciate the consideration of Mayor Palguda and staff of really looking at smaller vehicles, things that can operate for our particular region, especially as we do phase 1 and we go out. So it's not a traditional bus that you might be familiar with. I sat in it, if I remember right, I think it had 7 seats and very comfortable, and also ADA accessible. So all that to say that, again, applauds to Prescott Valley moving forward, appreciate the engagement. Anything else, Mayor, you wanted to add to that on what's happening with transit?
No, it's just like you said, you covered it in regards to these are just baby steps. We don't know what we don't know at this point, and we just need to keep kind of going along. And thanks to Norm Davis and Pedro, they really have embraced this, and we're going to try and give it our best shot, and that's all we can do. And do we know if it's going to be successful? No. Do we hope it will be? Of course. but at least we can say we tried. So that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you, Mayor. Then on the mobility management end of things, just to keep it on your radar, again, being a multimodal planning agency, I know we spend a lot of time talking about roads, sometime about transit, but we also have a component of CYMPO that is managing mobility, something we don't talk about very often. We currently have an agreement with Northern Arizona Council of Governments, NACOG, that they are actually handling our mobility management. Pedro Rodriguez was actually the mobility manager for NACOG prior to going to Prescott Valley. The agreement that CYMPO has with NACOG is that managing mobility will be handled for all of Yavapai County, which is really convenient to the people because they don't really know what CYMPO is. They don't maybe know necessarily what NACOG is. They need to get to their doctor. They need to get to the grocery store. And managing mobility from what we do is helping in that process. Is there a way to streamline the different services that are out there? Is there a way for the New Horizons, the Yavapai Regional Transits, the People Who Care, these organizations, is there a way for them to work together to coordinate services, most especially when federal dollars are being utilized? So federal dollars are at work in our community to buy vehicles, if you will, for Yavapai Regional Transit, New Horizons, these organizations. Dollars are at work to help the operation of those organizations. So CYMPO plays a role in helping to coordinate that. We currently have an agreement with NACOG where they are handling our mobility management. I am talking with them to see if that's how that's working. And at the retreat, I plan on giving a more detailed update. Looking at a couple changes to maybe give a little more attention to CYMPO. So I would say stay tuned to that. And that's all I have on this item. If there's any questions or comments.
Awesome. Looks like we're turning item 11 over to Todd. ADOT Northwest District Report, sir.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to report except for what we had on the 169. I know Road 1 North is currently we're trying to kick that off for construction, and we're procuring the poles and working on the utilities relocates to have smooth construction on the project. Those are the two updates I have. State Route 69, that one will be a fiscal year 23 project, and we'll be advertising it at the beginning of 2023. If there's any questions, I'll turn it over to the group.
Anything for Todd? No? Todd, you got off easy today.
Yeah.
All right, moving on, item 12. Gary, State Transportation Board update.
Thank you. And I talked to Vinny. I want to try to share my screen with you. I do have a couple of slides. Let's see if I can. There we go. I guess you're controlling them. You've got it. This was the presentation that was given to the board at the June study session. It basically highlights the changes in the 5-year program from February to the current date, and we will be voting on the 5-year plan on Friday. So if you'll move to the next slide, I'm going to move through these a little fast. There we go. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, here's one that kind of highlights out of 156 projects that we started with. Out of those 156, 78 have no changes, but the other 50%, 48 of them, either had funding increase or decrease, 16 new projects, and 14 moved somewhere in the year. Next slide. Again, next slide. Again. Okay. This kind of highlights, and I highlighted one of SR 69, but you can see this slide, and I think the next one will all it shows is funding increases or decreases. The decreases are in orange. That's a good thing because most of them increased a little bit, but you can see that the SR 69 Prescott Lakes Parkway is still, it shows an original amount of 1,275,000. It's up to 10,300,000, and that's, but it's moved to, it's at 2023, as was mentioned earlier. And I'm going to go through these a little fast, but Vinny has this slide presentation that he can email to any one of you that would like to look through it at a slower pace and read it. Next slide. More funding increase, projects with funding increase or decrease. Next slide. Again, same thing. Next slide. And I think this is the last one on increases and decreases. Now we've got new projects. And I think it's the very next one that has, there you go, I highlighted SR 69. On that one, mostly it was moved from 2022 to 2023 due to right-of-way issues. Next slide. Next slide. Again. And then the next slide. Next slide.
It looks like that's the end.
Is that the end? Okay. So basically, what I wanted to do is just give you an idea of how many projects were in the 5-year plan, 156. How many of them, how much of that was changed or added since February of this year, and what you're looking at are the changes. So if you get a chance, you can have Vinny forward that to you. You can go through at a much slower pace and see what changes were made. We'll be meeting Friday. I'll have to drive from the frying pan into the fires. It's hotter in Phoenix than it is here, of course. But anyway, I'll be driving to Phoenix tomorrow for the meeting Friday morning at 9 a.m. at ADOT. It's going to be our first, the Transportation Board's first in-person meeting of the board. Chairman Stratton has requested that all board members that can will attend this meeting in person, and hopefully in July we're scheduled for Sedona. Hopefully in July we'll be able to meet in Sedona in person as well. But anyway, we will be meeting in Phoenix on Friday in person with as many board members there as can make the trip. It's fairly centrally located, so I'm hoping that everybody will be able to be there. We've got 4 members that those of us that have been on the board have never met yet, so in person. So anyway, that'll be happening on Friday. That will still be closed to the public, and the public will have to attend the meeting virtually, which you'll be able to do. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take some.
Have anything for Gary? It's not. All right, item 13, future items for the agenda. Usually if you don't have to speak up now, obviously just get with Allison sometimes between now and our next meeting. And then with that being said, we need a motion to adjourn, and I'm looking forward to actually the retreat and being in the same room with each and every one of you.
I make a motion to adjourn, and yes, I can't wait either.
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? All right, guys, have a great night.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.